way that it's, why is there home ownership? It's almost kind of an interesting question, you know, why? What makes it possible that there would be home ownership, that individuals can buy it? And most people don't think about it. And most people actually just, it doesn't even pass through their mind to think about it. It's that taken for granted. And that is that there's a financing structure to allow people to borrow money with huge percentages of leverage by normal and rational standards to purchase real estate. And that, so there has to be a financial, money has to come from somewhere. So, but people don't think about where does the money come from. People say, oh, you just get a loan. Oh, I just get a loan. What does that mean? I don't know. I just go to the bank, get a loan. I'll talk to the mortgage person. I'll get a loan. Yeah, what is that? Why is the money there so you can get a loan? Oh, you mean money has to be? Yeah, money has to be there so you can borrow it. Where does it come from? There's this giant financial system because any, you know, well, and just about anybody can do it, right? All you need is a job. So there's this giant financial system that's set up, and it involves these different entities, these different government and quasi-government and private entities that raise the capital, enough money to create liquid pools of liquidity to finance everybody's desire to own a home. Mm-hmm. Not everybody, but you know what I mean? To where it's like, that's the American dream. So to have the American dream, there has to be a finance capability. And that finance capability we're living with today is like the aftermath created after World War II, right? But we have a finance system, a housing finance system, and it somehow raises the money so that when you and me go to buy or refinance a property, the money is there to make it happen. And so that finance system, the entities involved are entities such as the Treasury Department, which is part of the executive branch of the government, and the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank, and then all that entails. And then there's what they call the GSEs, the government-sponsored enterprises, which are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And these are the entities that buy loans. And the number I've been reading is that loan marketplace is like $6 trillion. So $6 trillion of the money. So you kind of think of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as entities that buy loans as assets. And I've known people that buy loans as that's a good loan. When you buy a bond, that's a loan. It's an asset. So Fannie and Freddie, they somehow get funded, and they're government sponsored. So the money is there, and there's a financial structure there, and there's risk there. And that's another interesting conversation. But so you've got Fannie and Freddie, these GSEs, you got the Federal Reserve, you've got the Treasury Department, you've got the FHA as a part of this. There's a lot of entities that come into play, even the Securities and Exchange Commission. And so, but there is this system that's set up to create the capital privately and through the government to create the financing structure for real estate in the United States. Now, what we've come, we're kind of new to playing around with this stuff, and we've been kind of examining some of this for the last year and a half, John Riley. But as we kind of look at this too, it looks like there's two camps. One camp would want private equity to be the source of the financing system, and another camp would want the government-sponsored enterprises. And there was a time, as I recall, many years ago, when there was, I guess, some degree of private enterprise, private equity, and that the Fannie and Freddie stuff was, or at least the Fannie was the riskier stuff, right? And then you had mortgage insurance for the FHA. So there was kind of that time when that took place, right? So there's this kind of this battle going on as to where should it come from, and who's the government-sponsored enterprises. That risk then goes to, and this is another conversation we should have as we delve deeper into this, that is a taxpayer liability, believe it or not. Well, because the government sponsored. And so there are people that want Fannie and Freddie to be the source, and then they can package up and bundle and sell. And then the other side that says private equity should be. Now, the reason the government kind of wants to have more control over this is because they want to set the criteria for who should qualify for loans so that they can kind of control home ownership. It's kind of a piece of this. And so what happens when the government makes decisions like that, it often does so with a blind eye to risk, because the government doesn't really worry so much about risk. So if the housing finance system fell more in the hands of private enterprise, you'd find less risk, or you'd find ways. That wouldn't mean that less people could borrow money necessarily. I mean, private enterprise find ways to use the data to minimize the risk. This gets into the ICE conversation. And if you can minimize the risk, then private equity can take play more of a role in this very important thing that we have in this country. And that's the housing, financing capability, the housing financing system. And so, the government, the US government, wants people to own real estate. And we know that because if you buy real estate, then you get certain tax advantages. When you buy a home, you can get a deduction, right? So the government wants to encourage home ownership. And the way we think of it typically is in the tax deduction. But a way that we don't think about how the government encourages home ownership, and this can branch out into all kinds of other issues, is through the housing financing system, which is the ability of this system, complex system, to put together and make available the liquidity and the capital to finance home ownership. And we're at a crisis point again. That's another conversation we'll have. That as a result of 2008 and a result of the Great Recession and the huge risks taken on by Fannie and Freddie, and those risks then packaged and sold as financial products purchased by retirement plans like CalPERS, meant that when there was like a collapse of that financial sector, it was felt across the economy and had played a major role in that Great Recession. And part of the way out of that Great Recession was something called quantitative easing, which is the government just making sure there was liquidity, enough money there, enough cash, liquidity, so that people didn't have to worry about things shutting down because there was enough liquidity. And that's kind of the way it's been for the last, since then. And because of that, values have gotten inflated. And we're now starting to see the squeeze. Now, interesting enough, John Riley, we're also seeing that there's some worry, or at least should be some thought about the loan portfolios of Fannie and Freddie and the risk that's been taken on loans, and whether or not the mistakes of 2008 were corrected or whether or not they were repeated, in which case they would make the coming recession possibly worse than people are predicting at this point.
And I think one thing related to that too was the fact that then Fannie and Freddie went into conservatorship.
Well, that's an interesting, in 2008, right? They went into conservatorship. They haven't exited conservatorship. So and we'll put the link up, one of the conversations that we listened to actually spoke of the fact that Fannie and Freddie could go under, that there's a possibility. And what would that mean to the financial world if Fannie and Freddie went under? And that's not to say that it would, but that's to say that there's a very, Mark Calabria, a very credible source who says that that's a possibility. And if it's a possibility, then even half of that possibility is not good, right? And so how would that work? How would that affect the economy? How would that affect you in your business? How would that affect you in your personal life? How would it affect you in retirement? It affects everybody. So some knowledge about the economy is critical. And again, what we're trying to do is bring light to that at the Data Advocate. So there's so much more that we can do today with visibility, with data, with the ability to put together models to view the data, and lots of solutions to the problems that are there. But it's about identifying them. I want to go back to one of my original points here, and that is that what we're going to try to do throughout this conversation is introduce pieces and then explain them a little bit more in depth. So today we talked a little bit about the housing financing system. And we didn't talk about it in great depth because we didn't want to get into the weeds. We could, but we don't want to get into the weeds. We just want to have kind of like an umbrella view of this. Because when people think of buying a property, they think of buying it and they think of the financing piece as secondary. The financing piece is really a primary piece. It goes hand in glove. Actually, they're what you can't have. It's like Love and Marriage. Remember that Love and Marriage, that song, right? You have to have both because very few people can buy their properties without financing it. So the capability of a market, a financing market to raise capital, to fund the ownership of real estate, that's a great point. Now, another piece of this is the fact that 43% of all the assets, something like $20 trillion, I think that was the number I saw. I can't imagine numbers that big, but that asset is the only asset class, and we should have a conversation on asset classes and how asset classes became asset classes and where futures markets were created around spot markets and how capital is raised and how it creates liquidity. Another great conversation and great piece to what we want to bring to the table. Another piece we want to get into is just the blockchain technologies that'll make a lot of this happen and possible, and some of the artificial intelligence ideas and the computing power and data science around all of this. But again, our overriding idea is that everybody should have the capability to buy a house today. And another piece of this is land use and land use policy, because if we've got these giant problems, and we do identify giant problems need to be taken care of, need to be addressed, the economy being one of them, climate being another, homelessness being another, just major problems. The only way those are going to be able to be addressed, or the resource to address it, is through a smarter use of the greatest resource, which is the land. So how do we better do that? Data. Being able to analyze the data, looking at the data carefully, creating the models to be able to do that. So the data advocate hopefully will bring some of these things up. You have an opportunity to discuss them. We'll have a number of different series. The first series will probably be this series where we're going to discuss the acquisition of by ICE of
Black Knight.
Yeah, Black Knight, and what that entailed. And but no, this bigger conversation also about the financing marketplace, or financing system in the country, and we'll pick it up from there.
So it's all going to be found in the Data Advocate, and more to follow on that. Thanks all.
Yeah.